What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. I always appreciate and enjoy reading all your comments. Make sure you drop one. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living on a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Also, make sure that notification bell's turned on so you always get notified when we release a show. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And before we get started today, I want you to understand what the word murder means. When we're talking about first degree murder, it's a willfulness that requires the defendant acted with the intent to kill another person. Thus, the death cannot have been accidental. However, the prosecutor does not have to show that the defendant intended to kill that particular victim. If the defendant shoots into a crowd with the intent to kill his friend, but he hits and kills a bystander instead, these facts can still support a charge of first degree murder. There needs to be deliberation and premeditation. Now, that comes from justia law. And when we're talking about murder in terms of organized crime, there are all sorts of different definitions and examples. A big point of contention over the years has been how many murders did Sammy the Bull Gravano actually commit? Today, we are going to go through every one of them, and we're going to distinguish how many he actually did. Now, in this show, it needs to be understood. This is the most important thing I'm going to say today. I consider a murder committed by Sammy Gravano to be one that he either pulled the trigger on or was there when it happened. So, for instance, if he's there and someone else commits the murder, but he's witnessing the murder happen, that is first degree murder, and he would go to prison for first degree murder. If he was involved with a murder conspiracy, that is not a murder. It's a conspiracy to commit murder, and he orchestrated it. We're going to go through a checklist, and we're going to do a little batting order of all of them. We're going to describe and understand which murders he actually committed, because he says he was involved in 19 murders. That's correct. But how many did he actually commit himself or was directly involved in? The story next on Sit Down Shorts. As we know, Sammy Gravano first became involved with the mafia in the late 60s with the Colombo crime family. Now, the first murder that Gravano was involved in was of a person called Joseph Colucci. That would occur in February of 1970. Now, most interestingly, this is one of the only two murders that I believe Sammy Gravano committed himself. And I know that because of historical record, as well as the fact that he told us about it on this show. There is competent proof that Gravano, in cold blood, killed Joe Colucci. Joe Colucci was a 26-year-old man who had connections to the mafia. He was connected to Tommy Shorty Spiro in the Colombo crime family. Now, at one point, Tommy Spiro begins some sort of extramarital affair with Joseph Colucci's wife, Camille. Now, Joe Colucci would find out about it and begin threatening that he was going to kill Spiro as well as Sammy the Bull Gravano. Now, obviously, we can understand Joe Colucci would be upset. The problem that Colucci had was he was not a made member and he was acting and saying stupid things. The orders come out. Colucci's got to go. And this is the first time Gravano tastes murder. And he talks about the fact that he was sitting behind Colucci in a car, stuck a gun up to his head, and shot him multiple times. Colucci's body would be dumped in Canarsie, Brooklyn. As we know, Gravano wouldn't last very long in the Colombo crime family, and he'd eventually move to the Gambino crime family. So the first murder we know of that Gravano committed was way back in 1970. At that time, he was just 25 years old, being born in 19 45. So pretty young. Let's fast forward to 1977. There's a lot of contention about the murder of 16-year-old Alan Kaiser. There's one thing we know. Sammy the Bull Gravano was present when Mr. Kaiser was killed in cold blood for being a witness to a crime. We've heard the story before. Kaiser would be walking home in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Dyker Heights, from his girlfriend's home. He would then witness a criminal act, and he'd be mistaken for someone else. Now, Sammy the Bull Gravano has discussed this murder. Okay, he talked about it one time on his YouTube channel, to which he anchored the blame and said that Louis Melito was the one that killed 16-year-old Alan Kaiser. Here's what I believe. I believe Sammy Gravano killed Alan Kaiser and does not want to take the blame, so he ushers it to Mr. Melito. Nevertheless, this is a murder committed in cold blood by Sammy the Bull Gravano. He does not want to admit it, but he's a part of it. He is willfully responsible for the murder of a teenage boy. That's number two. So the first two murders he was willingly involved in. The next murder would occur in 1978. Gravano would have to deal with the fact that his brother-in-law, a person called Nicholas Shabetta, had many issues. Now, Nicholas is the brother of Gravano's wife, Deborah. And Deborah Shabetta, down the road, would have her own legal problems due to the fact that she would be involved directly with selling ecstasy with her husband, Sammy the Bull Gravano, in Arizona. Now, Gravano, according to him, he would say that he found out that Nick Shabetta was going to be killed. Now, I pressed Gravano about Nick Shabetta, but he would not discuss it during our interview. Now, this is a very, very tedious subject. Now, again, I want it to be understood. This is what we know. It's not what I think, but I'm going to tell you about what I think happened to Mr. Shabetta. Shabetta would ultimately be killed by the Gambino crime family. You know, there's a number of reasons as to why he supposedly was killed. According to Gravano, he would say that, and people in the Gambino crime family and federal investigators would say that Shabetta was a drug addict, which, again, that's not a big thing. Okay. A lot of people were on drugs in the mafia. I don't believe that was why Shabetta was killed. Now, many people, including Frank DeChico, would say that the reason Shabetta was going to be killed and that Castellano ordered it was because he insulted the daughter of George DeChico. And that was a big issue. Now, I want to discuss another plausible theory as to why Nicholas Shabetta was killed and why Sammy Gravano will not discuss it publicly. Now, this is according to a woman called Laura Garofolo. Now, Garofolo is the daughter of Edward Garofolo. She would write a book several years ago, and this was reported by the New York Post and Page 6. According to Laura Garofalo and her sister, she would say that Nick Shabetta possibly knew too much, and that it's possible, and it was probable news, that it was willingly accepted in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, that Sammy the Bull Gravano was carrying on a relationship with another male who the Garofolos would say was named Jack Russo. And supposedly at one point, Nick Shabetta had also had a relationship with Mr. Russo, to which he knew the secret that Gravano had. So they're essentially claiming that it was common knowledge that Sammy Gravano was bisexual, and he had a relationship with this Jack Russo, and so did Nick Shabetta, thus possibly the reason Nick Shabetta was killed. Now, Gravano has claimed multiple times that he did not agree with the killing of Shabetta, and that at one point he even considered going after Paul Castellano. Now, at one point in his book, Gravano would say that he became obedient and said, quote, "I chose against Nikki. I took an oath that Cosa Nostra came before everything." Now, however, at one point it was claimed that Gravano allegedly told Frank DeChico, quote, "Fuck Paul. I'll take Paul out first." To which the Chico would respond that if you did that, you're going to be a dead man and that all your friends will be killed as well. And eventually he just got into line. So that's the third murder. Now, one thing we do know is Sammy the Bull Gravano did not personally kill Nick Shabetta. If you've ever seen the film Gotti, 1996, HBO, they claim in the film that Gravano kills his brother-in-law. That didn't happen. He was killed by other people, not Gravano. So that's a murder conspiracy. Now, this is a very publicized, the next murder. It's involving John Simone. Now, we have all heard about this one. Sammy talked about it regularly on his YouTube channel. Johnny Keys Simone was a member of the Philadelphia crime family. He was based out of Trenton, New Jersey. He was actually the cousin of Philadelphia boss Angelo Bruno. Johnny Keys ran rackets in Trenton, and as we know, in 1980, Angelo Bruno is killed, and it's a power grab engineered by a person called Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro. It was under suspicion that the Gambino and Genovese crime families obviously found out about this. It's also rumored that the Genovese kind of played Caponegro and got him to kill Bruno. Bruno's taken out thus dead. Caponegro is killed. It's also found out that Johnny Keys Simone was a part of this upheaval. The hit is put out on John Simone, and Sammy Gravano is given the contract in this case. John Simone would be abducted from an airport in Washington Township, New Jersey, and driven to a lot in Staten Island. Now, Gravano has talked very openly about this story. He would say at one point, as he opened the car door, Simone would say to Gravano, quote, "Let me walk out of the van on my own. Let me die like a man." Gravano would then say that Simone took a couple steps away from the van and without a word lowered his head, quiet and dignified. He would be shot immediately and fell to the ground. Gravano would say, quote, "He died without pain. He died Cosa Nostra." Now, Gravano would say he very much respected the way Simone accepted his punishment and died like, he said, a man. He did not pull the trigger, though. I will say that. However, he was present for the murder, thus first-degree murder. So there's number 3, a murder committed by Gravano. And at the end, we'll do the tally to this, and we'll come up with how many people he actually pulled the trigger on. Now, the next murder that Gravano would be a part of, allegedly, was of another Trenton gangster, a person called Frank Stillitano. They nicknamed him Frankie Stale. Now, from what I understand, in around February of 1981, Frankie Stale became kind of brash. He was this young gangster in Trenton that was attempting to muscle in on the rackets of a Trenton-based Gambino gangster called Nick Russo. Now, Nick Russo goes back many years in the mafia. He had been involved in New York operations for a while and then was sent at one point to Trenton. He was the Gambino's guy in Trenton. He was a very rich guy, had a lot of businesses. This Frankie Stale starts trying to extort businesses in the Chambersburg neighborhood of Trenton. He then gets into an argument with Nick Russo's son, Michael, outside a tavern. Frankie Stale shoots at Michael Russo and kills him. During this time, Russo had called his father, Nick. Nick actually takes a shot in the shoulder. So this kid, Frank Stillitano, is marked for death. Nick Russo wants revenge. He goes to Paul Castellano, and the order is given. Now, at one point, it's actually rumored that Nick Russo not only wanted to kill Frankie Stale, but he also wanted to kill Frankie Stale's infant son, to which Castellano was furious about and said, absolutely not. You just kill Frankie Stale. Now, there is some contention about this murder. Gravano is given the contract and supposedly is involved with it. Now, I do want to say this. According to Philip Leonetti, who was a member of the Philadelphia crime family and the nephew to Nicky Scarfo, he would say that Sammy Gravano did not kill Frankie Stale and that The murder was actually committed by Long John Martirano and Irish gangster John Burkery. So there is some question on this. It's really who you believe. The government believes it was Sammy the Bull Gravano. So we'll chalk that up as a murder involved. So that's one as well. But we'll chalk it up as a murder conspiracy. Now, I'm going to quickly go over a couple. We're not going to go into detail some of these because we'd be here for a while. In 1982, it was alleged that Sammy the Bull Gravano would order the murder of Frank Fiala, a club owner. It was also argued that in 1983, Gravano would also kill a person known only as Jack. Now, this is also just my opinion. This person called Jack, I had trouble finding anything about this. It was just someone ID'd as Jack. Now, remember, I talked about Jack Russo, who the Garofolos say was at one point Gravano's lover. I don't know if that's the same Jack. It's just interesting to discuss. Now, it was also said in 1983, Gravano would kill a Gambino-connected bartender called John Santiago. Now, I don't have any information on who John Santiago is. I did find a reference to an article in the early 80s about a person from Brooklyn called John Santiago that was a part of a local street gang. It is said that he did have Gambino connections. I don't know if it's the same John Santiago due to the fact that that's a very common name. So we could argue that both of these were murders committed directly by either Gravano or he was present for. So we'll give him a tally of murder on that one. Then he's obviously involved in 1985 in the murder of Paul Castellano and Tommy Bellotti. We know from historical record he was not a shooter in that case. In 1986, Sammy the Bull Gravano would take part in ordering the murder of a person called Nikki Cowboy Mormondo. Now, Nikki Cowboy was part of Sammy the Bull Gravano's crew. And according to Gravano, Mormondo was killed due to the fact that he was using powder cocaine and crack as well. Now, whether or not we believe that, he at one point was part of Gravano's crew. And as we know, Sammy Gravano went on a mutiny and killed all sorts of people that were his friends. I believe Cowboy was probably part of a smaller faction inside the Gravano crew that just decided they wanted to do their own thing, which we'll get to. Now, it was said Gravano did not directly take part in the murder of Nikki Cowboy, but he ordered it. In 1987, Sammy the Bull Gravano would also order the murder of Michael DeBat. Now, Michael DeBat, his father owned Tally's, the bar that Sammy would operate out of. Michael DeBat was, again, also part of Sammy Gravano's crew, but according to Gravano, DeBat became addicted to drugs as well. Now, it was also said that by this point, DeBat and Mormondo were kind of creating some sort of upheaval and trying to do their own thing and just kind of became revolutionaries, if you will, and Gravano got sick of it also and just had them killed. Now, in the Michael DeBat case, according to multiple people, it was supposed to be made to look like a robbery. And as DeBat was in Tally's at 6205 18th Avenue, an unidentified individual came in and killed DeBat. Now, it has been rumored over time that the individual that allegedly killed DeBat that night was Thomas Huck Carbonaro, another member of the crew. Let's keep moving. In 1987, as we know, June 5th of 1987, Gambino heavyweight Robert D.B. Bernardo would be killed in the office of one of Gravano's companies on Stillwell Avenue in Brooklyn. Now, we will chalk this up as a murder committed by Gravano due to the fact that Gravano was sitting there and present as Joe Peruta killed Robert D. Bernardo. Now, one thing I will give the film Gotti credit for is the killing of Di Bernardo, played by Frank Vincent, is actually quite real. That's pretty much how it happened. He sat down, was offered coffee. Joe Peruta handed it to him, and Joe Peruta shot him in the head. That was pretty simple. Now, the reason for DB being killed is twofold. Many people believe it was the fact that it was reported that DB was talking subversive, according to Angelo Quack Ruggiero, but is also referenced that after the death of Robert DiBernardo, who had control of Teamsters Local 282, guess who took over the contract? Sammy Gravano. Then we would find this out. Gravano just started killing people and taking over all their businesses. The next murder that was alleged that Sammy Gravano took part in was ordering the killing of his old friend, Louis Melito. Now, I'm not going to go over in detail this murder in 1988 due to the fact that we did a video pretty recently on it. But as we know, once Louis Melito got out of prison, he was still connected and enjoyed the Castellano regime. He had come up in that group. His wife, Linda, had told him at some point, you got to watch out about Gravano. He's acting very, weird. Melito's killed. Okay, we know why he was killed. We don't need to go into that. And it was alleged that Melito was killed at Lou Valerio's bar in the area of 17th Avenue and 72nd Street in Brooklyn. It was said that he would be killed by John Carneglia. Now, by the end of 1988, as we know, Sammy the Bull Gravano for a brief time would be the consigliere of the Gambino crime family. During his time as consigliere in 1988, he would be called upon by John Gotti to take part in the murder of a person called Francesco Oliveira. Now, Oliveira was a Sicilian who lived in Astoria, Queens. He worked at a pasta factory in the neighborhood of Woodside, Queens. Now, Francesco Oliveira was a factory worker, but he was also moonlighting as a coke and heroin dealer. As we know, with many Sicilians, they were readily involved with the selling of narcotics. At one point, Francesco Oliveira gets into a beef over a drug deal with a person called Giuseppe Gambino, a relation to the other Gambinos, John Gambino, Rosario Gambino, all the Gambinos, the Cherry Hill Gambinos. And in the term of the drug deal, Francesco Oliveira kills Giuseppe Gambino. John Gambino is furious. He goes to John Gotti on orders to kill this guy Oliveira. And obviously, allegedly, John Gotti complies, and he gives the contract to his consigliere, Sammy Gravano. Now, Sammy Gravano and his hit team would stalk Oliveira for a while, and they would then settle on the fact that every morning, Oliveira on certain days would move his car to avoid getting a ticket by the New York City meter maids. Okay, so they stalk him to his home and wait for him. The hit team allegedly comprised of Gravano, Lorenzo Menino, who acted as a driver. Menino was quite young at that point. A person called Joe Gambino, as well as Robert Bobby Cabert Bisaccia. Bisaccia would end up being the trigger man in this case, and they would kill Mr. Oliveira in 1988 outside his home in Astoria, Queens. So again, this is a murder directly committed by Gravano. He didn't pull the trigger, but he was present for this hit. Now, Gravano would then be involved in the conspiracies to kill Tommy Sparrow Spinelli in 1987, as well as being involved in a conspiracy to kill Willie Boy Johnson. Now, this one is the most brief of them. It was really just said that Gravano was involved in a conversation with John Gotti about killing Willie Boy Johnson, that he should do it due to the fact that Willie Boy may have been a rat, and the government gave him a murder conspiracy in the killing of him. One of the final murders that Gravano was directly involved in or planned was the murder of demolition contractor Edward Eddie Chink Garofolo. That murder would happen in August of 1990 in the area of 83rd Street in Brooklyn. Now, multiple members and associates of the Gambino crime family stalked Eddie Garofalo. Now, Gravano claims that Eddie Garofalo was going to cooperate, so he had him killed. His daughter, Laura Garofalo, claims that it wasn't any of that. Gravano just wanted Garofalo's business, and Garofalo didn't want to give it up. The final conspiracy of murder involved with Gravano was the 1990 murder of Louis DeBona. Now, we know from documents that Gravano also wanted Louis DeBono's business, and DeBono and him had issues over it. Now, as we know from the Gotti tapes, Gotti would say that the reason DeBono was being killed is because he didn't come to a meeting that I wanted him to be involved in. We would also know, though, Gravano was not involved in the actual murder. That was actually other members of the Gambino crime family, including Bobby Borriello in the basement of the World Trade Center. So that's one as well. So I'm going to kind of put a bow on this and kind of wrap it all up. The government alleges he is involved in 19 murders. It is important to understand, out of the 19 murders, 10 of them were conspiracy to commit murders. And I'm going to say which ones those are. The conspiracies to commit murder were Louis DeBono, Eddie Garofolo, Tommy Spinelli, Willie Boy Johnson, Michael DeBat, Nick Mormondo, Tommy Bellotti and Paul Castellano, Frank Fiala, and Nicholas Shabetta. 9 of these people were actually murders committed by Gravano or Gravano was present for. Those murders were Joe Colucci, Alan Kaiser, John Simone, Frank Stilitano, Jack, John Santiago, Robert D.B. DiBernardo, Francesco Oliveira, and the 2 murders committed by Gravano himself, just 2, not 19, 2, were Joe Colucci and Alan Kaiser, the first 2 murders that he was said to be involved in. So out of the 19 murders, in my opinion, and I think most people's opinion, Gravano was involved in actually pulling the trigger in 2. But he was involved in 9 murders in general. The government and any police department in America would allege murder to be you actually doing it yourself or being there and doing the murder. I.e., if I go out and kill someone and someone's there with me and we both are there, I'm a driver to something, that's murder, okay? That's a murder. Gravano killed 2 people, though, not 19. I just wanted to put a bow on this and talk about it. I want to end this conversation with this. According to a 1995 psychological evaluation performed on Sammy Gravano to assess his ability to successfully participate in the witness protection program, the psychological evaluation would say that, quote, Gravano was someone that should be monitored closely and that there was a substantial likelihood that he would engage in violent criminal behavior in the future and a moderate likelihood that he would engage in nonviolent criminal behavior in the future. It's just something that's interesting. Remember, Sammy Gravano is on YouTube talking about all this stuff. We also would know that he would break the law in the early 2000s selling ecstasy. We do know, though, we don't know of any murders, assaults, or anything he's done recently, which he hasn't. But I just wanted to include that psychological evaluation. We have to remember, there are maybe times where Gravano is likable. Seems like that grandpa you'd hang out with and he'd tell you stories. But the truth is, he is a depraved psychopath. He is a guy that killed his friends. He was a just awful dude, awful individual. I interviewed Gravano. He was nice to me, but the truth of the matter was he was just trying to web me into his lies and into his stories. He's a master manipulator. That's what he is and what he'll always be. He is a stone cold gangster to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.